Welcome to the Whitmer Cast, a podcast by the John Whitmer Historical Association. We bring you essays, interviews, panel discussions, and broadcasts related to Mormon history and restoration studies. My name is Katherine Pollock, and I'm currently a MA Religious Studies graduate student at Missouri State University, and I'll be your host for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. We have a great episode lined up for you. We'll be talking to return guest Nancy Ross. If you'd like to join JWJ or visit our entire backlog of episodes and JWJ journals, go to jwj.info. With that out of the way, let's get started. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Nancy Ross. She is a professor in the Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences Department at Utah Tech University and the current president-elect of JWJ. She has recently published Mormon Garments, Sacred and Secret. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us.
So glad to be here, Catherine.
Now, I'm excited to talk to you about your new book, but first I'd like a little background. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
hmm So I have my husband and I have been teaching here at Utah Tech. I think this is our 19th year. We met in graduate school at Cambridge in England, and I have 2 degrees in art history, and so my background is broadly in art history. I was in the art historian in the art department for here at Utah Tech for about 10 years. And then at that point, my research was really had moved solidly away from medieval art history and into the realm of Mormon studies. And so, and I've been hanging around in these sorts of spaces ever since. Um, I started off by doing a lot of sociology, and I still do sociology, but I do a mix of kind of sociology, history, and kind of religious studies projects these days. A lot of them have to do with gender, and of course, gender is an important theme in this book. But they also have to do with other other and related themes like women's ordination and let's see, other kind of you know, other related issues.
Now, I thought this was a really breakthrough book. You got around 4,500 responses to your survey about Latter-day Saint garments.
Yes.
Now, now, how did this happen? Where did you put that survey and how was it shared or what's that
Yes.
story?
Yeah. So when Jessica and I, so Larissa Kanno Kindred, our third co-author, joined us in the last few years. So this has been a project that's been going on for a really long time. I think Jessica and I started talking about this in late 2013, and then we held our survey in 2014. So this project is a middle schooler, as I've been joking with folks in the last few weeks, and we were both very involved in the Mormon feminist community at that time, and we were both very active Mormons at this time and wearing garments. And what we noticed was that when conversations in like the Feminist Mormon Housewives Facebook group, which was like a secret group at that time, when there would be questions or comments or discussion about garments, those posts and the comments would run into many hundreds of comments. And I felt like I was in like that there were a lot of things in these kinds of discussion spaces that I was encountering that felt like new information. But garments were one of the topics that would consistently run into many hundreds of comments and where I felt like I was encountering really new conversation because I'd not had a lot of garment conversations in my life, and neither had Jessica. And at the same time that we were still garment wearers, I would say that my garments were growing more and more uncomfortable, and I could pin and down and name some of those reasons, but I knew that it was like more than just like some itchy seams. And we really wanted to explore this. And we saw in some of these discussions that people had a much bigger, broader range of experiences with garments. And some of that looked like our own, and some of that was clearly beyond our own experience. And we really kind of had this fundamental question of Do other people experience their garments like we experience their garments? Or do other people have different experiences? And if that was like our driving, that was like the personal question that led to like the research question of like, what do Mormons experience with their garments? And we had just a really quick and dirty hypothesis that men and women experience their garments in very different ways. And ultimately, that's true, but it's also not true in the way that we thought it would be true. We thought men would have really simple relationships with their garments. There's a lot of literature in the sociology of religion that discusses women's agency around practices that some might deem to be restrictive. Right there, so there's a lot of discussion in the sociological literature around like women and choices. There's very little discussion around men and men's agency in like what we might term as gender traditional religions. And the data very quickly, like, so we put together, so from our initial questions, we put together this survey. And we included a lot of different things in the survey, but the three big open-ended questions that we were really interested in were like, what do your garments mean to you? Why do you wear your garments? And how does wearing garments make you feel? And we felt like those are really good, non-directed, like open-ended questions. And we wanted to understand what people were feeling. And we'd already done, sorry, this is a long answer to your question. I'm sorry. We'd already done some surveying of the Mormon feminist community in social media spaces at this time, and we'd had good luck getting lots of respondents. So we'd already had we had a survey with 1,800 participants by the time we started this survey. And our goal was really like, oh, if we can drop this certain, recognizing that we were trying to capture men's experiences and women's experiences. And of course, in and around gender, like if we were to rerun this today, we would have many more categories for gender. And we would also want to know specifically how transgender Mormons experience garments and gender nonconforming. And we were kind of, baby sociologists at this point. And so that would be different if we did this again today. But we wanted to know. And so we also wanted to catch a wide swath of the online Latter-day Saint community. And so we had a strong sense of where we could get Mormon feminist opinions. But we also had a strong sense of the different places where we could ask people to share our survey and where we might catch very different opinions and experiences. And we wanted that because we wanted our survey to catch like a wide range. We knew that it wouldn't be statistically significant, so we're not pulling generalizable statistics and then saying, the whole of Mormons, 35% of them think this way or that way. But we did capture a huge range. We'd hoped initially to get 500 responses. And at that time, Mormons still lived very much in the spaces of Facebook. And so we shared them in different spaces. We asked a bunch of different kinds of pages and groups to share our survey, and they did. And we got 4,500 responses within a week, which really surprised us, right? Which really, really, really surprised us. It's also true that at that time, your social media feed in a space like Facebook was just a complete reverse chronological order view of everything that could be in your timeline. And so it was actually easier to make a post go viral at that time because you didn't have to pay for it. And of course, that's different now with online social media platforms. So what we took away is that people really wanted to take the survey. And some of the more conservative groups and pages that we shared it with presented this to their followers like, these liberal Mormons are ruining everything. And so it is your religious duty to like take this survey. And people did. And what happened is that when you do survey work, and this was an anonymous survey, often people do not write in the box, right? Like if you're taking a survey, if I am taking a survey, it's very rare that I'm going to take the time to not just fill out the multiple choice questions, but to also write in the box. because that takes time and effort, and nobody is compensating anyone for that. But in this particular survey, people had what we have just termed a lot of garment secrets. And because of the taboo on talking about garments, people had had a lot of things that they had kept to themselves for a long time and then shared those very freely in an anonymous survey. And so what happened is that we got so much more data very, very quickly, and we actually did not have the tools at all to work through it. And one of the reasons why this project has taken such a long time is because we actually had to learn and acquire the tools to and the skills to be able to process this much data and to be able to make meaning of it in a way that we felt like we could really do justice to what was said and commented on and shared with us in the survey.
Now, there are three authors to this book. How did you
Yes.
three come together?
So, Jessica and I had worked together on several early papers and some survey work on the Mormon feminist community, and those had gone really well. Jessica was a student at Cambridge University doing like a certificate in religious studies. She'd had an undergraduate degree at that point, and I we had connected online because I'd seen her guest post in a blog somewhere and saw that she was at Cambridge, and we had just left that ward and that place where we had my husband and I had met, and we had decided to get married, and that's where we first lived after we were married. And I have family in Cambridge, and it's where my mom joined the LDS church. It's where my parents met in that same ward, and so I have a lot of history in this one particular ward. And so I was, of course, very excited to connect with someone online who knew all the same people or many of the same people I did, and a few years after we had left. And so we met online and working through some of these early papers on Mormon feminism, we became good friends. I had two little kids. She had four little kids, and our youngest were the same age. We'd been through a lot of different things and some similar things in Mormonism, and it was just a really good working partnership. And she and I went on to write a lot of things and together. And I think we both grew as scholars quite tremendously through all of these conversations and through this relationship. And she is one of my closest friends. A few years ago, kind of into the pandemic, which was so hard for all of us, and a particular challenge if you're, a parent with school age children, also trying to make sure that they are learning at this time. And she eventually needed to focus on some other things in her life and her career. And so, of course, I have an academic job, and I've had an academic job for a long time. And she did not have that same kind of position. And so, after working on this project for about a decade, she needed to kind of step away from it, which was very sad. But we are still on very good terms. But I knew that I needed another collaborative partner. That at this point in my career, I've have a number of collaborative partners, and they have been such important friendships and learning relationships for me. Of course, David Howlett is my other long-term collaborative partner, and my second longest collaborative partnership. And these kinds of relationships are so important. And so, a few years ago, I went to Sunstone, and I've done a lot of Sunstone over the years. And I saw that there was going to be another talk by someone who had done her own study of garments, where she had surveyed and received responses from more than 8,000 women. And I was like, what? Her survey is bigger than mine, and maybe, some like, weird like envy stuff there. And so I went to her presentation, and it was fantastic. And I could tell very quickly that she had a really good grasp on her data, that she was able to tease out the complexity of it. And she had a kind of passion and enthusiasm for this that I thought might blend well with what I needed to see this book project through to the end. Because this project had felt so heavy and kind of painful, and I needed some like fresh excitement. So a few years ago, after Sunstone, I sent Larissa a message and asked her, look, I need a partner to help me get this thing across the line. And she was like, I guess, okay. And then she and I started working together. That has been very successful, and I look forward to doing some more projects with her. Her experience and life experience is a little similar and a little different than mine, which is perfect for collaboration. And so, and these people, it's hard to work with someone and invest your like life work with them and not grow to care and to make new friends. And I think collaborative partners is an important way to grow friendship for academics. And so, yeah, so that's kind of how this shook out. And I'm very happy. I am very happy that I have had these two partners to help me get to the end of this project, and that we have all arrived and benefited, I think, from what we have learned, and that's exciting moving forward.
Now, in your book, there's a lot of personal stories from the three authors,
Yeah.
and you call this autoethnography.
hmm
So, could you give us a definition of that, and why did you feel like that was important to include?
Yeah. So that was actually that was a tricky piece of um, this longer story. For a long time, we tried to write a journal article version of the book. And of course, a journal article is about, 8 to 10,000 words often, and a book is about 60 to 70,000 words, generally speaking. And so, these things do different kinds of work. After a number of rejections from journal editors, we realized that in order to do the project justice, we really needed to be thinking about a book. And so that meant not just writing a report back on the survey data, but we wanted to write a book that would appeal to a broader audience. And one thing that was really clear was that we needed to read a lot of different kinds of academic books. So I've read, I mean, obviously, as scholars, we read a lot. That's kind of a hobby. But I read a lot of different kinds of sociology and history books to try and figure out in what do we need to add to this survey data to help make it compelling. And one thing that became clear is that we needed some narratives. We needed some stories. And while we had a lot of stories from our survey, you can't ask follow-up questions in an anonymous survey. And we wanted to flesh out and give kind of more detail to that lived experience through what we're calling autoethnography. It's when we use our own experiences as the source of our academic study material. So this book is mainly based on a survey. We also have a chapter of history, which is not survey based, but mainly we are drawing from this survey data. And then we use these personal stories, this autoethnography, to introduce different themes that our chapters are related to, and in the hopes that we can pull people in with the story, and that the sense of real lived human experience through our different stories helps to anchor this book in a way that is useful. I also think that it's a very unique book because all three of us were garment wearing Mormon women, which is not always the case in an academic book. And we thought that our lived experiences and our stories, our underwear stories, would that that would be something different. And it's not, I've never opened an academic book and read stories about somebody's underwear before. And that felt both very risky and hard and awkward, but also like a good way to own our each of our individual relationship to the material and kind of lay out our like our credentials that we aren't writing this and we weren't writing this as outsiders to the community, but rather as former insiders. And of course, when we started this project, Jessica and I were still very much in the church, and very actively participating and teaching with callings and very involved. And that, of course, changed over time. And now, I'm an ordained woman in Community of Christ, and that's all kinds of a story I couldn't see, when this project began. But yeah, anyway. So autoethnography then is when we're like studying the stuff of our own lives, and then we're presenting that as material for analysis. And of course, there is a lot of analysis and the using of theoretical lenses and the using those autoethnographic stories to introduce particular themes in the survey data.
For people that are Community of Christ or people that are outside the community, what kind of expectations do Latter-day Saints have around garments? If you could just name a few.
Yeah. So that you wear them all the time, basically. And while there have been some different ideas about this, and of course, the latest series of Secret Lives of Mormon Wives just dropped like yesterday, the day before. My sister is already done and is waiting for me to finish. My husband and I are only on episode 2. So there's an expectation that we're going to wear them night and day. So this is an basically all the time practice. Sometimes people in the community broadly understand that you don't need to wear them for sex, showering, and like swimming, or a lot of people don't wear them when they're working out. But you will also find people who do wear them while they're working out. But the expectation is that you're kind of doing this practice all the time. I do think that that separates it from a lot of other kinds of spiritual practices in the sense that it's hard to think of other spiritual practices that you were supposed to be engaged in continually in in other traditions, like literally all the time. It's hard for me to come up with other kinds of comparable examples. I'm sure there are, but it's not easy to reach for any because usually, uh, prayer is something you might do regularly or routinely or throughout the day, or there are other kinds of spiritual practices that you might engage in routinely, but very few that you would do continually. And so if you're always supposed to be doing a thing and wearing a thing, it is with you all the time. And then if taking off garments is problematized, right? I live in a very Mormon community in St. George, Utah, and it is not hard to see who is wearing and not wearing garments. It becomes looking to check for the hemlines, the very distinctive hemlines of garments is really a reflex for most of the people in the community. And so and that is like a proxy for being a good Mormon, right? If someone is wearing their garments, that's like a sign that they are a good Mormon, that they are doing and believing the right kinds of things in Mormonism. And so it becomes a shorthand for what we would just call worthiness or ideas about being worthy or temple worthy or just generally, worthy and good in Mormonism. And that is also one of its bigger challenges.
And you created 4 categories that you put your respondents in:
Mhm.
conforming women, non-conforming women, conforming men, non-conforming men. How did you end up creating these categories?
So that was a long and hard process. We had a lot of demographic data on and we were trying to figure out. So if our initial hypothesis was that like men's and women's experiences are very different, When we started reading through the responses, we saw that yes, we do have different kinds of answers here, but we also have a lot of unexpected answers here. The range of experiences that men had with their garments was huge, much bigger than we had expected. And the range of experiences and the difficulty of experiences that women reported were also huge and more complicated than we had expected. And so then, okay, well, we have two, if we expected there to be kind of a tidiness around gender, that has not worked. That has not worked out. And so just dividing them by gender doesn't work. Of course, one of a tool that we often use in feminist scholarship, but also scholarship informed by feminism and a lot of different fronts, is the tool of intersectionality, where we understand that a person is not just living one element of their identity at a particular time, but rather that their life experience is shaped by the sum total of the collection of their identities all at once. And we're like, well, we cannot do a million categories, but we need more than two. And we need to understand what other factors that, that that are shaping these experiences. What does that look like? And a variety of demographic factors, we could not really parse that out very easily. That there were no obvious answers there. There wasn't, and so things like household income or education level or geographic area, right? Like where people were living, right? Like there were a lot of factors that or active, that just did not easily correlate and correspond with these different demographic factors. We had included a battery of questions that were very similar to Temple recommend questions, which some other researchers had used prior to us, and we're like, well, we'll just throw these in. We were junior researchers at the time. We're like, well, we're gonna throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And what this allowed us to do was to come up with a belief index for each person. So basically, then what we realized is that if we took gender and in using the belief index, people who had experienced doubt and people who had not experienced doubt with regard to their belief in Mormonism, is that we saw, again, not completely tidy categories, but we were able to begin to kind of say, okay, we're seeing some real patterns that are forming when we think about gender and belief. And we don't typically understand belief as a kind of identity. But what we realized, and what other people have suggested in Mormonism, is that belief could be an identity. And we spent a lot of time thinking about how we wanted to label different identities around experiencing doubt and not experiencing doubt, because there's a lot of pathologizing of doubt in Mormonism. And we came up with the term conforming and non-conforming believers, not because that's perfect language, but we wanted to take the judgment and sting out of our language. So Jana Reese, who is a scholar whose work I love, she uses a language of like believers and doubters. But what we also realized is that our people with doubt also believe. And so we wanted to be clear that people with doubt also still believe, and that to kind of try and find language that described some of the shape of that belief without judging it, if that makes sense.
Now, what was the difference in the sample size between conforming and non-conforming?
So our biggest group within that, and I don't have these numbers, I can probably dig them out in a moment. But so we had about 4,500 people who responded to the survey. Our largest group of respondents was conforming women, so women who do not experience doubt. Our second largest group was non-conforming women. And then I think we had non-conforming men, and conforming men were our smallest group. But there were still hundreds of people in our smallest of groups. And so our results are not like statistically significant, we would say, in the language of social science, which is that we don't take these statistical findings and then applied them to all members of the Church, of Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but rather that I think that our sampling does reflect these ranges of experience. So we can't say, yes, 24.5% of Mormon women experience this with their garments, but we can say that conforming believing women, like that the picture of what they experience with garments is this shape. Kind of, and then describe, and then in our book we describe those ranges of experience.
How have ideas around secrecy affected your respondents' experiences?
So what we saw, and especially in the open-ended response questions, is that people were like pouring their hearts out, is what it felt like to read those. And that was very jarring because this is not what we expected. We didn't expect a lot of people writing in the box, right? We didn't expect that. And so what it was clear very quickly is that because of the format of an anonymous survey, that with a topic that is very taboo to talk about, and I think it's a little less taboo right now than it was in 2014, but it was very taboo, and that the secrecy element, and that literally because we did not know who the participants were, that they felt free to share beyond what they might share normally, like in a face-to-face conversation. And of course, one of the questions we asked was, what happens when what do you do when people complain about your garments? And a lot of people gave kind of judgy responses, right? Like the taboo has long been fairly well enforced. And so secrecy becomes, it's not just secrecy in terms of talking with people outside the community about your garments. It has become a kind of internal taboo as well. I think people experience that in different ways. But the sense then that in responding to the survey that people were breaking through that secrecy was really important. What we also have understood as we have read more widely around secrecy is the way in which secrecy creates disconnection, right? It can create like social disconnection. So when we can't talk about things, we become a little bit disconnected. And what was clear was that people had a lot of big feelings that they had not had places to express before until the survey came around, that they then expressed in the survey because they could not share them with people in their real lives. And a lot of big, hard feelings. And so it felt like people were sharing their secrets, right? So we've got this like different kind of layers of secrecy in operation. And then we have in the taking of the survey, people sharing their secrets with us. And as the researchers, Jessica and I were like, we were not anticipating this. We were anticipating receiving data, right? Like not like holding someone's secrets, which then you start talking about secrets and secrecy and then breaking that. And then all of a sudden you are talking, and the literature suggests that there is a relationship with things like shame, and that there can be a relationship with things like control. And so suddenly we've got a lot of big, heavy concepts in play because we were breaking through this social taboo. And we knew we were breaking through the social taboo. What we didn't anticipate was how that would feel for people who were taking the survey, how it would feel to receive that. And I will tell you that one of the reasons it has taken so long to bring this project to the end is because those secrets are heavy. Sometimes when you're doing research and you're collecting data, it's like, ooh, this is just interesting, but it doesn't really hit you in a big, deep in the feelings. And for us, this project and its data has been hard to hold and hard to process. And we had to put the project down a lot of times over the years because we needed a break from the heaviness of it, if that makes sense. So I would say that, like, of course, in the title, right, like if you've been involved with Mormonism, right, like the way that people often talk about the temple is that it's, one of the official explanations is that it's sacred, not secret. And of course, that's in the title, Mormon Garments, Sacred and Secret, not sacred, or sacred, not secret is the title. It's both of these things. And what we kind of came to the conclusion was in the naming and identifying of our big chapter themes was that sacredness in Mormonism was kind of a way of just talking about like holy secrecy, and that there is this like value of holy secrecy. And that if you are a conforming believer and you do not experience doubt, you kind of understand that kind of sacred, not secret, will make sense, right? Like that there's a kind of that these holy secrets are important. They are sacred, and these sacred things must be protected from the outside. And if your orientation to belief is different, if you're a non-conforming believer, then these things start to look very different, and you see different systems at play, and you can see the systemic nature of some of these issues, and you kind of understand that this is about, in fact, secrecy. And so this idea that these two things kind of mean the same thing, these two words mean the same thing. We also do create similar pairings around worthiness and shame and obedience and control in the book. That there is like the religious language that we use for this concept, and then there is kind of the ordinary language we would use for a concept. But seeing these two things paired together are not necessarily things that Mormons would themselves pair together, but how a religious concept looks very different depending on your orientation to belief is a theme and an idea that we really wanted to emphasize in this book.
Now, how have ideas around or the respondent's agency, how did that play a role in your survey?
So this is really interesting, and this is one of our driving questions. And a lot of the work that Jessica and I had done with Mormon feminists before we came to this project was still looking at literature around women in agency. Scholars like Orit Avishai, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but her work has been really important on Jewish women. Also, Saba Mahmood and others have written a lot about women in agency, together with Amy Hoyt within Mormonism. Sociologist Kelsey Burke has a great, I believe it's like Sociological Compass article on, which is like a lit review of women in agency in the sociological literature. And so this is like a question, right? And it's kind of a question that we often that many scholars gravitate to. It's a question that has changed shape over time, where once upon a time it was largely secular scholars looking at what is sometimes referred to as gender traditional religions, and then kind of judging women's actions and trying to kind of point out issues of control, but kind of from the outside of a community. And the shape of that literature and those questions has changed over time. One of the things that many scholars in the last 15 years or so have tried to argue is that women who are making choices that conform to religious expectations are also using their agency. They are making a choice, and they do this for a variety of different reasons, and scholars describe this in different ways. We kind of, this has been a question we have sat with for a really long time and have tried to understand. I think our book makes some contributions to that conversation. In the conclusion, we talk about, what are the costs of some of these denominationally specific practices, such as the wearing of garments, in the lives of not only women but also men, because this was also clearly men and their agency was a real thing that emerged in our data that we did not expect, was that men would also feel like their agency was being constrained, even though trends in garment design have largely followed men's underwear. We'd not expect their men to be expressing feelings of being controlled, which is exactly what happened, um, especially with non-conforming men. Um, and so we're trying to understand that it isn't just, there aren't just like costs to taking off garments, that there are real costs to conforming to the practice. That if you are, um, a devout Mormon and you wish to do what your community expects of you, that you might pay some very high personal costs in order to do that thing. Um, and that I think is both obvious and not obvious to people, both in and outside of Mormonism, and that some of these costs are kind of devastating. Um, will also be, I think, news to many people, both in and outside of Mormonism. So the question of agency, it's not one that we resolve, but I think it's one that we contribute, where we can contribute to the discussion, by saying that, that it isn't only women who experience these problems around agency, but also that, um, right, not all men hold the same position of privilege and power in gender traditional religions, but they experience through an intersectional lens, right? Like um, they experience things in different ways. And certainly we saw, um, men who not only had non-conforming believing identities, but also LGBT identities, expressing, real challenges with wearing garments. Um, and and that women had a much wider range of difficulty and experience than we had also expected. And so trying to then further complicate these ideas about agency in a way that also center bodies and embodied experiences. I think a lot of the discussion around garments in the official teaching of the LDS Church is very abstract, and it's trying to connect garments to a lot of different things. And temple ceremonies connect garments to a lot of different things. They are the coat of skins that Adam and Eve were given by God in the Garden of Eden. And they are also a lot of other things as well. They're also like the clothing worn by heavenly visitors that Joseph Smith saw, and that's what he was trying to model the original garments on. And over the last 200 years, garments have taken on a lot of different meanings. And many of those are fairly abstract meanings that garments, in a sense, make real and make these different religious ideas real by putting them in close proximity to the body. But when you involve bodies, you also take on a lot of different kinds of embodied experiences. And that's something that Mormon teaching and policy and regulations and rules around garments have really not done a great job of taking into account how people have very different experiences with their underwear. And of course, this religious practice and these items of religious clothing as underwear and the way in which they interface with the body is an under-discussed issue. And it was one of the big driving forces behind doing the survey and writing this book.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit about garment history. So
Mhm.
one of your chapters is just a chapter-length history of garments.
Yes.
How much was how much literature was already out there before you wrote that chapter?
So very little. And I will also say that I am writing a further full book length history of garments for signature books, which I have signed a contract for and I'm very, eagerly working on, which is really exciting. So that'll be garments through the lens of fashion history. And fashion history is broadly the lens, or there's definitely bits of fashion history in this chapter, um, trying to understand how garments develop in relation to other forms of underwear, um, and try to understand then what Joseph Smith was doing. A lot of Mormons seem to think that garments were modeled on Union or just an adaptation of Union suit style underwear that already existed. But the reality is that Union suit style underwear and single piece underwear really didn't exist at the time of Joseph Smith, and didn't come into to development until later, and then into popular use not till really the end of the 19th century. And so, what it does help put into perspective this idea that what Joseph was doing was very innovative and even progressive, even if that's definitely how we would not describe garment styles today. But it helps us understand something to kind of give a little more depth of understanding. So prior to this particular chapter, we've got a little bit of garment history in Colleen McDaniels's chapter, where she, in Material Christianity, that famous and very influential and important book, Material Christianity, which is about like the material culture of Christianity in America, and a really important work in religious studies, and where Colleen McDaniel interviewed 30 people in the Salt Lake area about their garment experiences and includes a little bit of garment history in there. There really isn't a lot of other garment history. There are a few blog posts. There are some odd collections of documents that have circulated in private hands, but there isn't a lot. And it was really exciting to write that chapter. That was the last piece of the book that was drafted for the first time, and it continues to be a wild ride of a project. The fashion history of garments and how garments have adapted and changed over time, and how they underwear constructs Mormon bodies over time, and what that means to Mormons and in society. There, it is garments are just like the gift of a topic that keeps on giving in many ways, even if it's also a very awkward topic.
Now, have you gotten any responses to your book yet? Is there a certain like topic or something that really people are really excited about or have lots of thoughts about?
I think that a lot of the very earliest comments have been excitement about garment history, because I think that is a big question throughout the lifespan of this project. When I'm like, oh, I'm writing a book on garments, or I'm writing about garments, they're like, everyone assumes that it's a history of garments, and it really didn't include a history until kind of the later stages of the book project. The first full draft did not include a garment history, and that was some of the feedback we got from our the woman, the sociologist Liberty Barnes, who gave us feedback on that first draft, was that it should include a chapter on garment history, and that was really good advice. So we took it. So there's a lot of interest in garment history, and there's still many points of garment history that I'm still trying to clarify in this ongoing project for signature books on garment history. So I think there's a lot of that. Uh, and of course, it is still very early days of publication. It's been out for like less than a month. So it's, still very early days. But I did go into work last week. And, so many people in my life have been so wonderfully generous and pre-ordered the book, and have been so supportive. But the advisor in my department, she she came in the other last week, and she was like, "You will never believe what happened." And I'd be like, "What happened?" And she was like, "I was trying to read the book. I was at home. I was trying to read the book." And her husband, she's both former Mormons, kind of stole the book out of her hands, stayed up 2 nights in a row reading the book, and had many thoughts. And that led to some big conversations about religious experience and reflecting on what they had both experienced within the church, and about embodied experiences, and opened up a lot of conversation for them. And I heard that, and I was just filled with joy that that had happened. And I loved, so this friend's husband is not an academic, is not a scholar. He does tile. And the idea that this book was engaging and appealing to a broad audience is exactly what we had been hoping for in constructing the book in this way. And I feel like that was the biggest compliment anyone could have paid me, which is that it is not hard to sell a garment conversation to women, because I feel like we all understand the problems pretty well, even if it's hard to vocalize or even if there is a taboo. But I think that anyway, so I've had very positive early feedback, and that has been very exciting to me. A few weeks ago, we were on Ben Park's YouTube channel, and there were like more than 100 comments, and of course, a lot of that were just being really dismissive of the whole topic. I don't think those folks have read the book, but we always knew that in writing a book on garments, we were going to make a lot of people mad, and that is not why we did it. We did it to better understand our own experiences and to extend the conversation of around bodies into this sphere with this really important embodied experience in Mormonism. You might say it is a central religious practice in Mormonism. It connects Mormon bodies to the temple. And temples are hugely important in Mormon theology. And so we're just very, for people who are actually engaging with the book, I feel like any response is a good one, because we're hoping to start conversations. And I love the idea that this book helps couples and people communicate better with each other around their experiences, and helps to just open up more conversation around bodies and sexuality. And for people who probably need that conversation, and also for people outside of the community to have more understanding. I think a lot of people, when I have told them that I'm writing about garments over the years, have assumed that I was writing some kind of expose. And that was never the driving force. And some people may read this book as that, but I do not believe it is that. And I'm trying to be sympathetic. Once upon a time, I was a conforming, believing Mormon woman. And we spent a lot of time, especially in leaving the church and in continuing this project, trying to understand our former selves who made these choices, and to both also understand that these were reasonable choices. And trying to explain that to people outside of Mormonism, that this seems really strange, and that a lot of people have made fun of this particular practice, but that this is a very important practice in the community, and to try and take that seriously, to try and take our own experience, our own past experience seriously, and even as we critically engage with it. And I do feel very happy for myself with the balance of taking this topic very seriously and also engaging with it critically.
Now, I've asked all my questions, but what is next for Nancy Ross? What projects are you working on?
All kinds of things. Too many things. I think it's fair to say there are too many projects. And all of them are fabulous, so I can't give any of them up. So I am writing slower than I would like, but a full-length garment history for Signature Books, and that is just a project. So if writing this first garment book was just like pulling teeth for 12 years, which is kind of emotional teeth, it's like pulling emotional teeth for 12 years, which is kind of how it felt. Then writing about garment history is just feels easy and joyful somehow, very strangely. Um, I continue to work with David Howlett on projects around women's ordination in the RLDS and Community of Christ and LDS traditions. We also have organized a conference at Smith last year. David organized a conference at Smith last year, and we've got an edited volume coming out or that's in the process of peer review right now. And I have other projects with Caroline Klein, a scholar at Claremont, on women and Mormon women and their experiences in and around and ideas around work. And we have got to go to Finland last summer and like interview Mormon women in Finland, which is one of the most fun things I've ever done academically. And I've got some other emerging projects, a big digital humanities project with Spencer Stewart at Purdue, where we have just started looking at a huge data set of Zoom church, of like YouTube Zoom churches that get a glimpse into the average Sunday experience of Mormon congregations across America. And so, which is so exciting. And so and a few others besides. So I have many people, many great collaborative partnerships these days doing a lot of work that feels very exciting and meaningful to me in and around Mormon studies, doing, the more sociologically driven. Oh, and I've got another one, religious exits with Bethany Gull, Mormon exits, so people who disaffiliate and have their name removed. And anyway, they're just too many projects, and they're all great, and they're with people I really enjoy working with. So life is good. I can't complain.
People want to get in touch to comment about the book or to ask a question, where can they find you?
So you can probably find me in social media. Have spent far too much of my life in Facebook, so Facebook Messenger is a place where people can connect. I have my email address and my work email are floating around in different kinds of spaces, but through social media, through email. These are all places that people can connect. And of course, if people have read and engaged with the book, they can leave book reviews in a whole variety of different kinds of places. Um, yeah,
You've been very gracious with your time, Nancy. Thank you for joining us.
thank you for having me.
Once again, we'd like to thank Nancy Ross for joining us today and lending her voice and expertise to the ever-growing field of restoration studies. You can find them on Facebook. You can look up their work page if you'd like to follow up, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
We want to thank you for tuning in to the Whitmercast. John Whitmer Historical Association is an educational nonprofit institution. For more information, visit www.jwha.info, where you can meet our team and join the association, read past issues of the JWHA Journal, and get updates on upcoming conferences and events. Our theme music is I Love to Tell the Story, composed by Tom Moraine. This podcast is a production of John Whitmer Historical Association, all rights reserved.